Thank you all for joining me. I've been diving deep into a topic that seems pretty esoteric, if not incomprehensible, but I feel like I've made some progress, and I'm here to share with you what insights I've found. The real struggle, I think, with hybrid entities is being able to create a language that can merge both the legal and the technical, and honestly the magical aspects of hybrid entities. So, short and brief of it is that a hybrid entity is something that has both a legal or a physical component, such as an LLC, as well as an ethereal or a distributed component, such as an ERC20 token or a DAO. There's some advantages to this sort of structure, and I think we're just starting to see people take advantage of them. The main thing, the easiest fruit, is limited liability. So that way, when your DAO's self-driving car runs over a self-driving stroller, you aren't personally liable for your DAO. There's also other ways of tying together the rage quit with the operating agreement so that anyone can exit the LLC using a smart contract instead of having to go through legal means. Of course, most DAOs have issues interacting with humans. There's a certain amount of barrier between the normies and the smart contracts. And by creating a legal entity, you have the possibility of issuing a contract that they sign, that they can recognize as being valid and meaningful. It's in human language instead of machine language. And then lastly, being able to work with other corporations. Most corporations aren't ready to deal with smart contracts, so for them to be able to work with an LLC that is sort of a wrapper for a smart contract, they might feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. But before we dive into the specifics and the pragmatics, I'm going to give a little bit of a background in history. We're going to go back in time to 1651 when Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan. This book became sort of the foundation for political science because it sort of put us into this notion that we need the social contract. We have to have this monopoly of violence hanging over our heads, because if we didn't have that, things would be even worse. He says that covenants without the sword are but words and of no strength to secure a man at all. And moreover, without a monopoly on violence, there would be no arts, no letters, no society, and worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So you can see we're kind of stuck in this catch-22, where we all recognize that having a militaristic police and an invading army is kind of a bad thing, but at the same time, we don't want to be raided by bandits ourselves. So there's a lot of, we feel like we're kind of stuck. And I guess one of my arguments is that this is certainly true for the physical domain, but smart contracts, ethereal, whatever, that's opened up the possibility for enforcement by other means. So historically, the monopoly of violence is sort of teetered between autocracy and oligarchy. Occasionally, there might be a wave of anarchism that wipes things out. But lately, we've seen this very strange consolidation where the king sort of gave up their autocracy by making joint stock corporations. This allowed anyone to effectively become part of the nobility. And by that, I mean being able to take advantage of the Leviathan, being able to profit off of having a trade monopoly or some other sort of intellectual property monopoly, and having your property rights backed up by the implied violence of the state. So I'm tying together this notion of the legal as well as with the physical, and this is again from Hobbes. The universe, the whole mass of things that are, is corporeal, that is to say body. Every part of the universe is body, and that which is not body is no part of the universe. And because the universe is all, that which is no part of it is nothing, and consequently nowhere. What's exciting is now we're at that time where we are in the nowhere. We do have non-physical. We do have an ability to take our ideas and put them into something that is just loosely physical, but really it seems to be something of its own. So to start off with, we have bits, which are an arrangement of physical components, but we as humans, we're not interested in the specific arrangement. We're interested in the abstract layer. The abstraction allows us to build virtual networks, which is just an organization of bits, and these virtual networks when further solidified by human and machine consensus-making systems, allow us to create a jurisdiction, a domain, some sort of portal to something I call the ethereal. This notion I have is that within all of these types of systems, there is some sort of life. It's replicating patterns that are trying to sustain themselves. They're trying to get energy. They're trying to get currency. They're trying to get more ether. They have some amount of instructions. They have some amount of replication. And I'd argue to some degree they're living. This is a lot of overlap to the mystical concept of an egregore, a thought form or a collective group mind, an autonomous psychic entity made up of and influencing the thoughts of a group of people. And again, this very much parallels Leviathan, where Thomas Hobbes says, for by art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth or state, which is but an artificial man, though of greater stature and strength than the natural, in which the sovereignty is an artificial soul, as giving life and motion to the whole body. Let's take a look at this meme from the Moloch DAO creator. He's saying that he gets the meme, he gets the idea, he gets the concept, it goes into his head, and then they write the code. The code must serve the meme. What I'm asking all of you is that, is the code serving the meme, or is the person serving the meme, right? Did he choose this meme, or did the meme choose him, right? So what we're starting to see is hybrid entities that are native to both the physical real world of nation states as well as the virtual world of Ethereum and other distributed networks. They're capable of leveraging both legal and smart contracts, and they're potentially resilient against the critical failures of one of their components. If you have, for instance, your LLC gets sued and it's tied to a DAO, you have the option to not pay the judgment. You would collapse the legal component, but the decentralized component could still potentially exist. And the same is true going the other direction. So these are all, I've been working through these different systems. I've tried to make a map that made some sort of sense. I originally had this idea I was applying for a proposal to connect Aragon's jurisdiction with the real world jurisdictions. So I was thinking, oh, maybe if we have the software, we can connect these things. But I realized really the thing that's connecting them already is the human side. All of these systems, they're still dependent upon humans. Some of them are more autonomous than others. So in the ethereal world, there's a lot of things you can do, but there's a lot of things you can't do. And what I'm arguing is that each time you go through a phase transition, we can go from the non-physical to an actual DAO to a decentralized organization where there's humans, but there's some decentralization, to networks, to code, to legal agreements, to courtrooms, to enforcement. There's a lot of energy that goes into each of these transitions. And what I'm trying to convey to you is that the amount of energy that it takes to shift between these different states is reducing. And what that is increasing is the power of DAOs and the power of humans who are able to create in one of these formats and to be able to take that idea and bring it into the physical world. It used to be a huge pain in the ass. It wasn't really scalable, but it's starting to become more and more feasible thanks to this collection of tools. Some of the things that I think are vital to this process, open law is making it so that you can create legal contracts and have them signed by humans, and then once all the humans have signed off on it, then it executes a smart contract. The DAO platforms like Aragon and DAOstack are of course making this way more accessible. Ethereum and all the others will be used to notarize the documents, the agreements, but then you would want to stash the full text of it someplace else, like IPFS. So let's get into some real-world examples. Again, I feel like this is so new. It wasn't until last year that hybrid entities were public. And in 2020, we're starting to see some that may end up gaining as much traction as the original DAO. Metacartel's venture DAO, I believe, is a Delaware LLC. They just recently, like a few days ago, published their grimoire, which is their operating agreement, their pact. So I've noticed this interesting theme of magic usage beyond just my own proclivities, and it seems to be a recurring theme within this space. What I can tell you about this is that they're still requiring investors to be accredited. They're not actually doing a security sell. But there's room within this organization for people who aren't accredited investors to be able to help the operations of the system and then in turn gain some of the currency, some of the value. Similarly, open law and consensus have been starting the LAO. They haven't published their operating agreement yet. But their investment thesis is, what if we did the DAO, but it was owned by us and it was legal? And that's the experiment they're taking. They're going to use it to fund Ethereum projects. And again, it's tied to a Delaware LLC. It's using accredited investors. And it's still honestly pretty human focused. There's still a human manager that's necessary to actually operate the thing. The manager is sort of held responsible to execute the DAO's votes and then act accordingly. Huh? Yeah, so we'll go get into that a little bit later, this question of can you have one of these things running but there's no human, right? Like, that's like one of the more interesting questions that by the end of it we should be able to answer. It's just a meme I made about consensus. Joseph Lubin is trying to push it up, but it seems like they're about to get merged into JP Morgan, perhaps. So I got entered into this space because a friend of mine was really into Wyoming, into this like hybrid entity space. And I didn't buy it at first. I had been up there as a teenager. I thought it was boring as heck. But I've been up there since then. And just being in this environment where there's all of, like, it's a small government, you can actually enact change. It seems like it's actually made a safe haven for crypto projects. So let me just very briefly explain why I'm like super excited about Wyoming. First thing is that you can represent your company's equity as a crypto token, and the state recognizes it. There's not going to be like a big debate about it if you have to go to court over, hey, someone gave me these tokens, they said they were worth part of the company, they're trying to screw me over, right? But the most interesting part, though, is that rather than listing your shareholders or your members using their name and their physical address, you can list their network address and their public key. So I think that opens the door for, is this DAO run by humans or is it run by intelligences or artificial intelligences? Also super valuable, the limited liability company series allows a parent LLC to have thousands of children. I wanted to experiment with this myself. I made Dow LLC. It has 1,000 children, which I'm trying to give out like AOL CDs, so if anyone wants like a test LLC to just mess around with, please let me know. It's controlled by 2 members. Only some of the stuff you have to use cryptography. It's called cryptographic consensus is the term I used, and I'll show that in a second. So for instance, when we're transferring one of the children to you, we want to have a vote on that so to make it official, and then that also makes sort of a timestamp showing at this point in time we agreed onto this, and we're now issuing this token which represents ownership of that child, of that series. So different ways that the ethereal component and the legal component can be bound together. These are just ways to think about it. Loosely means there's an interaction between the hybrid, like the alien component, the ethereal component, and the humans. It's not really formalized. Having the door in place, it's like, oh, there's like they recognize each other formally. There's a way of interacting that's explicit. And then tightly would mean that they're locked together. It's not just that they can decouple at will. There has to be some sort of process by which they unlock and unbind to each other. And again, another way of looking at binding, it could be that the DAO points to an LLC, but the LLC doesn't point to the DAO. And one of the things I've come to the conclusion of is that it's important for there to be bidirectional linkages if you want this hybrid to be legitimate. You want to have the ethereal component explicitly say, we're recognizing this LLC, or we're recognizing that John Smith has permission to form an LLC on our behalf. Because otherwise, it could just be someone saying, hey, I made the venture cartel LLC, but they don't really have the authority of the venture cartel to actually make an LLC on their behalf. And then the last, like the more complex, is for them to be in a position where they're able to unlock and decouple and still operate autonomously. So that's like, if shit hits the fan, is your legal component going to still be able to exist? Is your DAO still going to be able to exist? So some concrete ways that we can see a legal component binding to an ethereal component is by declaring the owners with their public network address. That can help you say that this decision was made in a way that required this key to sign off on it. You could have just your management be authorized to perform some smart contracts. You could have some decisions require cryptographic consensus, or all decisions require cryptographic consensus. This is taken from a hybrid operating agreement, the New York Dow LLC by Ross Campbell. And it's pretty much just saying, like, hey, if we make a decision using our DAO, it's legally binding. And you can look at our DAO's votes at that address right there. If you're trying to bind your DAO to a legal component, you want to have the DAO vote on whether or not it recognizes this legal component, or someone has permission to do that. I think there will be standardization of this process eventually. But what are we really here? We want to be able to protect ourselves, we want to have minimal governments, and we want to be able to go to a court of law and argue that, hey, I have these tokens, they're not respecting that, even though we had this DAO. That's the minimum, right? You want to be able to present your case. So going back to this topic of the Leviathan, the internet pioneers didn't foresee the corporate aggregation of power over the internet. So what are we doing in blockchain to prevent our overlords of tomorrow? I guess my argument is that these DAOs, these hybrids, they are just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than nation states, than Monsanto, than Halliburton. Because you can't kill them, you can't sue them, you can't be like, stop it, you can't just like cut it out, right? It will keep going. So we need to have this in mind of like, do we have emergency kill switches? Do we have ways of decompartmentalizing it? Do we have ways of chastising it in a way that actually has meaning? So yeah, please do not name your entities after gods of child sacrifice. Don't put much trust in entities claiming to be hybrid that are not clearly bidirectionally coupled. And do not put full trust in experimental structure that might explode, which is true for either the legal or the etheric component. If you are going to try this out, document your path, post it so other people can benefit. Ask critical questions if you're on a team that's forming a DAO, like really dig into it, try to see how this could break, how a bad actor could break it. I think I'm almost out of time. So yeah, conclusions, hybrid entities permit new types of life. It's an experimental art that will become increasingly automated. I think that people will be creating DAOs or interacting with DAOs and they won't even know that, right? It's in the game. It's built into the software. And they might end up fighting the United States and other big existing Leviathans, but they might end up becoming even worse. That's it. Thank you for your attention and time.